On July 6, 2026, nearly an entire country went dark. Almost 10 million people across Cuba suddenly lost electricity. Refrigerators stopped working, water pumps failed, hospitals switched to emergency generators. It was the country's third nationwide blackout in just 1 year. Almost immediately, the blame game began. The Cuban government blamed the United States. The United States blamed communism. But what if neither explanation tells the whole story? Welcome to Financial Secrets, where history and economics are never as simple as they seem. To understand today's Cuba, we need to go back to 1959. After Fidel Castro overthrew the Batista dictatorship, he promised a fairer society. The new government expanded healthcare and education, achievements many Cubans still value today. But there was another side to the revolution. Private businesses were nationalized, political opposition disappeared, and the government took control of nearly every major industry. Over time, that created an economy where one mistake at the top could affect the entire country. Agriculture shows the problem perfectly. Despite fertile land and a favorable climate, Cuba still imports much of its food. Farmers often lacked fuel, machinery, fertilizer, transportation, and enough incentive to produce more. The country had the resources, but not a system that rewarded productivity. For years, those weaknesses were hidden by foreign support. First, the Soviet Union supplied cheap oil and bought Cuban sugar. When it collapsed in 1991, Cuba entered a devastating economic crisis. Later, Venezuela became the island's new lifeline. But instead of becoming self-sufficient, Cuba simply replaced one dependency with another. The same pattern appeared in its energy system. Power plants aged, infrastructure deteriorated, and years of underinvestment left the electrical grid increasingly fragile. But Cuba's internal problems are only half the story. For more than 60 years, the United States has tried to pressure Cuba. Through economic sanctions, the goal was simple: weaken the government until the system changed. The problem is that governments often survive hardship better than ordinary people. Sanctions don't just limit trade. They also influence banks, shipping companies, insurers, and investors around the world. Even legal transactions become difficult when businesses fear losing access to the American financial system. In 2026, that pressure increased again as Washington targeted Cuba's energy sector and countries supplying oil to the island. Fuel deliveries declined. Then the blackouts became even worse. Did U.S. sanctions directly cause the July blackout? No. Years of neglected infrastructure had already pushed the grid close to failure, but fuel shortages removed what little stability remained. When the system finally broke, millions of ordinary Cubans paid the price. Food spoiled, businesses closed, hospitals delayed treatment, public transportation slowed. The crisis quickly fed itself. This is where the debate becomes uncomfortable. The Cuban government often blames the embargo for its economic failures, and sometimes that criticism is justified. But decades of centralized planning, weak incentives, and delayed reforms also played a major role. At the same time, Washington insists its sanctions target the government, not the Cuban people. Yet after more than 60 years, one thing is impossible to ignore: the people waiting in food lines, the families living through endless blackouts, the patients hoping hospitals keep their generators running. They're not the ones making political decisions. They're simply living with the consequences. So who is responsible? The honest answer is both. Cuba created an economy that became too dependent, too centralized, and too fragile. The United States then spent decades making recovery even harder through economic pressure. One created the weakness, the other kept increasing the pressure. The biggest tragedy is that both governments claim to act for the Cuban people, yet ordinary Cubans remain trapped between them. Maybe the real lesson isn't about choosing sides. It's about understanding that when a fragile economy meets decades of relentless external pressure, governments often survive, while ordinary people pay the highest price. If this video gave you a new perspective, make sure to subscribe. History has the answers. I'll show you where to look.